Hey y'all, this is episode number 26. Going to be talking about the right to refuse service and what's going on in Canada right now, which inspired this episode. Thank you once again to Flavor Raid for creating the intro music you're about to listen to. Their EP All My Life is available on Spotify and wherever you stream music. And thank you once again to Adam Paris for coming out and being on the podcast. It was a lot of fun. If you're in the Austin area and need your TV mounted on the wall or sound system upgrades, anything of that sort, check out Bat City TV, give them a call and mention this podcast for a discount. So thanks for supporting me and supporting my fellow Austinites who are doing awesome things, and I hope you enjoy this episode. What's up, y'all? This is the Sovereign Individual Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Guerra. Thank you once again for joining me today. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you would do me the favor of subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show if you're enjoying it so far, and sharing it with anybody you think might be interested in it. So I took a little bit of a break after the first conversation with an interesting person that I did last weekend. I had a lot going on and didn't get a chance to record. Plus, it was an hour and a half long conversation or so it was a longer episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. It went really well. I enjoyed it a lot. I had a lot of fun. I look forward to doing more of those. I also learned a little bit too, so I do want to apologize for those who have listened or are planning to listen to the conversation. Whenever I'm speaking, throughout a lot of it, not so much early on, but more in the middle, there's kind of an echo whenever I'm speaking. So I realized for the interview setup, I had Adam sitting where I normally sit, where I'm sitting right now, and I sat in a different part of the room, and the sound just traveled differently. So if I wasn't right up on the mic, there was an echo that was coming. So again, we're learning on this podcast, and it's all relatively new. So lessons that'll be learned, and now I know for next time, in order to avoid that situation, to stay up closer to the mic to prevent that sort of echo. So do apologize for that. When I was listening back to it, it was really annoying me. Hopefully, it's not quite as annoying to you. I'd like to think of myself as my own harshest critic, and I'm very particular about that kind of stuff, and very when I'm listening back and trying to find things that I could improve on or things that I can do better, I'm very critical of myself. So hopefully it wasn't as bad for you as it was for me listening back to it, and it's just a case of me being extra hard on myself. But let's jump right back into things. Let's go over what we're going to talk about today. And what we're talking about today is an important part of business and liberty and freedom, and that is the right to refuse service. And so this is coming up specifically at this moment due to an incident in Canada. And so in Canada, there is a multitude of lawsuits that have been filed by one Jessica Yaniv. I believe it is pronounced that way. Last name, formerly known as Jonathan Yaniv. She's a trans woman there in Canada and is suing, I think, 12 different women for refusing to give her a Brazilian wax. Now, where this issue stems from is the fact that while identifying as a female, Jessica Yaniv has not had surgery. I forget the exact term for it. What is it? Reassignment, gender reassignment surgery? Is that right? That sounds right. I think it's right. Gender reassignment surgery. So Jessica Yaniv still has a penis, and she's been contacting services in I believe she lives in British Columbia, and requesting to receive a Brazilian wax from places that cater specifically to waxing females. And so upon finding out that Jessica Yaniv has male genitalia, they have refused to do so. And so she's now bringing 12 different women to court over this. one of which is an immigrant and has since had to go out of business due to this and the legal fees and the time spent fighting this in court. So what we're talking about here, if this is, there's anti-discrimination laws and transphobia or discrimination based on trans status is listed in there, is considered a discriminatory act. So what we're talking about here, if this goes through and if the court deems that this is discrimination and that one or all of these 12 women will have to do this, you're talking about state enforced sexual assault. And there's no other way to view being forced to put your hands on another human being's genitalia when you do not want to do so. This is the definition of sexual assault. And this would be perpetrated and forced by the state under the threat of violence, is what we're talking about right here. So it's amazing to me that there's even an argument to be made here, that there's even this sort of fight that this individual is attempting to use the violence of the state to force somebody to touch her genitalia. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. So I guess in this regard, for these 12 women, it's her body but not her choice if the state decides to do this. And if Jessica Yaniv gets what she wants, then it would not be the choice of these 12 women as to what they would do with their body, because apparently the needs and desires of one Jessica Yaniv is more important than their desire to not touch a sexual organ that they have no interest in touching. And it doesn't matter. I do not care what the reason is for it. I don't care if it is because they don't like the idea of trans. It could very well be, and more likely be, since these are waxing places designed or catering specifically to women, it could be that they don't know how, they don't want to risk waxing a penis and causing harm or damage and then subjecting themselves to a lawsuit for damages. Whatever the reason. Or they're just not comfortable. Maybe they're married and they would feel uncomfortable touching another man's penis that's not their husband's. Who cares what the reason is? The fact of the matter is, you don't get to make that decision for them, and you certainly don't get to use the violence of the state to do it. And then it gets into this really weird thing too, because Jessica Yaniv, there's been a lot of, I guess I wasn't made aware of her until this all broke, but I guess she's somewhat popular on the internet and in kind of like nerd circles. I guess she has like a review site or something like that, and so things have been known about her for a while, since before she made her transition, and there's been a lot of accusations thrown around. And so I'm just gonna there's been accusations on the internet and by nerd people, I guess people within the nerd culture. And there's been screenshots of conversations that occurred while still identifying as Jonathan Yaniv, and talking about the transition and talking about whether or not women all get naked together in the locker rooms, which is creepy enough. But then this is from the official Township of Langley website. It was a delegation request to appear before the Township Council. And so basically it's kind of to host an event or do an event. And this was filed by Jessica. The date that the event was going to be is actually today. It was set for today, July 22nd, 2019. And so let's just look at the topic real quick by Jessica Yaniv. And again, this is from the official website of the Township of Langley. And this is just a PDF posted to the request. And it was filed by Jessica Yaniv. So permission for LGBTQ2S plus organizations. I guess that's I'm guessing that's the common designation used in Canada, perhaps, or whatnot. So, organizations to be allowed to host an all-body swim at TOL Civic Pools. I'm guessing TOL is Township of Langley. WG Rec, WC Blair, and Otter. So I'm guessing those are pools. For people aged 12 plus, where these events will be restricted to LGBTQ2S, and individuals will be permitted to be topless at their leisure, in compliance with the laws of Canada, and where parents and caretakers will be prohibited from attending these events as it's considered safe and inclusive. So again, we're talking about an event where you're age 12 plus, so you've got 6 years before being considered legally adults that you're talking about, and it's going to, there will be permitted to be topless, and parents and caretakers would be prohibited. So this is what is interesting too. Like, this just kind of gives an idea for the type of person this individual is. This Jessica Yaniv is, and that really lends credence to the accusations of pedophilia. If you're going to be hosting something for people aged 12 and up and saying that you can be topless if you choose to be, and that no parents or caretakers are allowed to be there, that's definitely not a normal type of thing to occur, and that's certainly not something that I would hope any of these parents or caretakers would be okay with dropping their kids off at. But then you get into this problem too of, it's okay, so this is this type of person, so it does not in any way surprise me that this same individual would then bring this lawsuit against people to try to use the violence of the state to force somebody else to touch them, to touch their sexual organs. And it's just this problem that you run into where, first of all, there's no leg to stand on in this argument, like I said earlier. But then you're really losing any credence or credibility if you're making an argument in favor of Jessica Yaniv based on this alone. This is not the type of person that is worth defending, and this is the type of person directly that lends weight to the argument made by folks who are, transphobic or whatever you want to say, anti-trans, that these types of people are going to be going in the bathroom pretending to be women and all that kind of stuff. I don't really want to get into the screenshots that from the conversations, because a lot of it's just kind of gross and not really something I want to read on the podcast. But you can look them up; they're easy to find if you're Twitter. Just go ahead and search Jessica Yaniv. There's a bunch of stuff. So again, it's just, this is detrimental to trans activism everywhere. It's detrimental to feminist movements that you would be trying to force 12 women to, at the threat of violence, to do something with their body that they don't want to do. It's just sick. It's absolutely sick, and it's absolutely frustrating. And it's, again, one of those things that this type of thing can only happen with the existence of a state that has a monopoly on violence, and that can then use that violence and that force in order to make citizens do things that they don't want to do. And that's what we're talking about here. It's the same type thing. You talk about similar cases. It's the same situation as the wedding cake argument, where the baker doesn't want to make a wedding cake for a gay wedding, and instead of finding another bakery or finding another place to get it. I mean, it's not always just bakeries. There's grocery stores. There's all kinds of places that do wedding cakes. Instead of doing that, they attempt to use the violence of the state to force the baker to make the wedding cake for their gay wedding. So first of all, it's just weird to me that you would want to force somebody who doesn't want to make you a cake to make you one. First of all, that's just weird. Second of all, I mean, so where does it stop? Can you force a black baker to bake a white power cake for a KKK meeting or a white nationalist meeting? Could you force a Jewish baker to bake a cake with a swastika on it? Could you force a doctor who morally objects to abortions to do an abortion, to perform an abortion? Could you force a doctor in a state where right to choose or right to die rather is legal, and you can choose to end your life with when the proper things are met, which again that's a whole other bag of worms. But could you force a doctor in a state like that who doesn't believe in right to die to euthanize a patient that has chosen to end their life? I would hope the answer to this question, to all these questions, is no. And that you would not force somebody through the threat of violence to do something like that. Because at the end of the day, this is what it comes down to. You are not entitled to anyone's labor. Full stop. That's it. I don't care what it is. I don't care what the service being performed is. I don't care how important you may think it is, how important it is to you personally. I do not care. You are not entitled, and you do not have a right to someone else's labor. It's the same. This argument comes up all the time, in different forms. And people want to try to use the violence of the state to force businesses to provide them services. And this is why the right to refuse service is such an important thing. It's the freedom of disassociation is as vital as the freedom of association in a free society, in a liberated society, in the type of society that I want to see. You have every right to choose who you don't want to be a part of your life, who you don't want to do business with, who you don't want to interact with, who you don't want to come onto your property. That is essential when we're talking about liberty. And when you talk about something like this anyway, state involvement is absolutely awful because it prevents market corrections. It prevents the market from bankrupting businesses with poor business practices or poor beliefs and deciding what they want to do. Perfect example, the segregation laws that existed that were put into law. Again, it was legal, put into law by the United States government, by the state, enforced with violence. Why did they have to make those laws? Because business owners were selling their product and their services to anybody of any race because they were like, I don't care, it's profit for me, and I'm going to make money off of it. And it was because the market was reacting in that way that the state and those who were in power who couldn't stand that idea had to come in and force segregation with the threat of violence. Because the market wasn't segregating. The market doesn't care. And that's not to say that there weren't, before segregation laws, that there weren't jerk-offs who were saying, no blacks are allowed. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that there were places in business that didn't care. And that the reason those segregation laws had to be written was because the jerks who were like not allowing blacks into their restaurant or their store are seeing their, competition on the other side of town, letting anybody in and taking anybody's money because it's all the same money and it's all good money. And they're saying, well, that's not fair. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. We need to pass a law that says you can't have blacks in there either. Because I don't want blacks in my store and there shouldn't be blacks in that store. He shouldn't get to make money off of them. And so then the state had to come in and through the threat of violence had to enforce segregation laws. And so when you're bringing the state into something like this, you're not allowing the free market to correct itself or to course correct or to punish bad actors within the marketplace. Like, I want to know this as a consumer. I want to know places like this. Like, again, I would never, ever endorse somebody being forced to bake a wedding cake for a gay marriage. And they don't want to do it, and they don't feel comfortable doing it. That's fine. I also want to know where that bakery is, so I don't patron it, because I don't believe in that. So they're not going to get any of my money. Because one, first of all, just on a moral basis, there's no, I mean, it's weird too, like, because there was a time in my life when I was a hardcore conservative Republican and against gay marriage. And it's just weird thinking back to that time and where my justification came from it, because even if you are of the religious belief that homosexuality is a sin and shouldn't be celebrated or whatnot, that is completely, entirely removed from the idea of marriage, especially once the state became involved. You know, the state becoming involved changes everything. So there's no... as long as the state isn't trying to force a pastor to perform a gay marriage when he is morally against it, there's no basis of logic for being against gay marriage when it comes to the state involvement. Now, I am of the opinion we should get the state out of marriage altogether. I'm of the opinion that we should get the state out of everything. The second reason, so morally, I think it's wrong to refuse to bake that wedding cake and to view gay marriage in that way. But aside from that, I don't want to patron that bakery, because you're a shit businessman or woman if you're refusing a paying customer because you have some moral problem with the lifestyle that they're choosing. That's idiotic. That's money you're losing out on. What are you doing? I don't care. I don't care what you do in your personal life. I don't care what your beliefs are. I don't care if everything you believe I find abhorrent. If you are the type of person that wants to use the violence of the state to, try to force everything to be equal, to try to forcibly take and redistribute wealth, to try to, control every aspect of the economy and every aspect of education and every aspect of the citizens' lives. If you want to do that, and you want to, you're the type of person who believes in that and who ignores the past of every socialist endgame of every country and how detrimental socialism is and how it destroys and how it's killed far more people than the Nazi Germany ever did, even though they were socialists too. You could believe all that kind of stuff. If you're coming in my store and you're going to give me money, that's money, man. I will take that money any day. I will take that money any day. You want to come in and you want to buy stuff from me? That's funding my ability to challenge your ideas and to keep you from turning the state into even more of a powerful and overreaching and disgusting entity than it already is. So, yeah. This is a bad business practice. So again, I want to know these types of things as a consumer so I can not patron them. It's the type of thing, like, I don't get up on arms. I don't like what Google is doing. I don't like a lot of their business practices. I especially don't like what they're doing in China in the way in which they're blocking information. You can't look up Tiananmen Square incident on Google in China. I don't like their business practices. I'm not calling for the government to get involved. I'm not calling for the government to tell Google they have to either make everything searchable in China or not work with them. That's not the state's role. This is a private business. They can conduct themselves however they want. But my response is I no longer use Google Chrome. I use Brave. For any of you who might be interested in, it's a private or like a privacy focused internet browser. I use DuckDuckGo as my search engine. It's very similar to Google as far as search capabilities go. And I'm in the process of moving over from a Gmail account to a Proton Mail account. So those are just things that I am doing as a consumer in response. And that's the beauty of the market, is that consumers can choose to react how they want to. And you're stripping me of that ability if you're using the violence of the state to force businesses to act in a certain way or provide certain services or do certain things. I want to know so that I don't patron those businesses. However, these 12 women don't fall into that category. And I would absolutely continue to patron their businesses in whatever way, if that's gift cards for the girlfriend or whatever it is. Obviously, I'm not going to go in there asking for them to wax my ball sack, but it's just, again, this is a result of a state existing that can use violence and can use force in order to make people do what it wants to do. It's the only entity that is allowed to do that. And we allow it to do that. We have this argument where people say, well, humans can't be trusted and humans are bad and instinctively and we need this mechanism in order to keep them from doing that. So because humans are bad and we can't trust them, we need to create an organization that is so powerful that can force people to do whatever it wants them to do with the threat of violence. And that organization is going to be made up of people. And not only is it going to be made up of people who, by the logic of that argument, were just established as being instinctively bad, that organization draws to it the worst types of people. And we're supposed to just be okay with this insane amount of power that we've handed over to them? The type of power where if these 12 lawsuits are ruled in favor of Jessica Yaniv, the type of power that can force a woman to put her hands onto genitalia that she does not want to touch, that can force a woman can enforceably make her stay in for sexual assault. I don't know how I was. I don't know. Got caught up there trying to get to the sexual assault part, but that's what this is. And we've allowed this entity to exist. But yet, people who fall into the camp of believing that anarchy is a desirable and eventually obtainable goal because of technology and where it's bringing us, we're supposed to be the crazy ones. Goodness gracious. I just can't even believe that. I can, especially because it's coming from Canada. But it's just insane. And you want to talk about intersectionality, tongue twister, jumping through hoops to try to figure this one out. You've got a trans woman versus an immigrant business owner versus the idea of forcing women to do something with their body that they aren't choosing to do and don't want to do. It's insane to me at all that there can be any argument made in favor of Jessica Yaniv, but I know they're being made out there. I've been reading about the arguments being made. There was somebody today who called Ricky Gervais transphobic because he commented on this. It is nuts. People are losing their minds. People are losing their minds. People are wanting to force people to do. I mean, it's just that we let this. Yeah, that's where we're at right now. That we could possibly have the state forcing women to do this. So, again, this is why I do what I do. This is why I do this podcast. This is why I talk about this kind of stuff so much, because it's important that we recognize this. It's important that we recognize the hypocrisy of the state, the hypocrisy of the idea of the state, the hypocrisy of the power that we give to the state and allow to enforce and rule over our lives. the possibility of them forcing us to do something like this that we vehemently oppose, that we're opposed to the idea of doing. And this one especially, like, how is this a thing? In 2019, not that far removed from the vast movement of the Me Too, and we're talking about whether or not a waxing employee or business owner has to be forced to wax somebody that they don't want to wax. That's nuts. That's the state for you. Totally nuts. But that's going to be it for this episode. So thank you for listening and sticking around once again. We're going to be getting into more this week, probably. I can't remember. I think I wrote it down. I hope I wrote it down. I had an idea for another episode to do today. So I'll probably record on Thursday. I've got the happy hour thing on Wednesday. So anyway, that's no concern for you. But appreciate y'all listening to it. And I will catch you on the next episode. You are a sovereign individual, and so are all 12 of those women, and there's no excuse to forcing them to wax the male genitalia of Jessica Yaniv. You do not have the right to someone else's labor. Thanks, y'all.